Hello, everybody. Last week, Judge Yvonne Gonzalez Rodriguez has ruled on the Apple versus Epic Games case in what seems to be a split decision, but primarily in favor of Apple. As a summary, Epic's key win was that the court sided in its favor under the California Unfair Competition Law and issued an injunction which would enable app developers to link out to external purchasing mechanisms. On the Apple side, the court ruled most importantly against Epic's claims of Apple as a monopoly, in that it's up to Apple whether to allow Fortnite back onto the App Store. Finally, Epic must pay Apple its 30% cut of fees it collected directly from customers using Epic Direct Payment on iOS. With us today to talk about the case results, we have first David Hoppe, managing partner at Gamma Law, a law firm focusing on the video games industry in addition to various other verticals. And finally, Chris Hewish, president at Xsolla, who specializes in App Store and other payment methods. Welcome, guys.
Great to be here.
So I thought we could go ahead and start with like the initial discussion is in terms of the court ruling. And as a lawyer in our group, I thought we could start with you, David. Can you add a bit more color to the court ruling? And can you confirm whether my understanding of the ruling is correct or not? What do you think?
Sure, yeah, and thanks for the opportunity to be on the show. So it seems to me this is a pretty strong outcome for Epic. And I'm a little confused about Tim Sweeney's tweet that seemed to be a sort of declaration of defeat by Epic. Apple's PR, of course, declared victory, as you would expect. But Epic seems to me had a good basis on which to make the claim also. And, you know, you would expect them to say something like, well, there's more work to be done and we'll keep fighting, etc. But any event, under the court's decision, Epic can, at a minimum, provide Fortnite users and users of other apps with a purchase link in the apps that would go to the Epic Games Store. And depending on how you interpret the judge's decision, which is something we're going to be talking about here, they may even be able to include a side-by-side payment option for the Epic Games Store right in the app. You know, viewed from the perspective of a year ago, it seems to me this is a major change to the status quo that we've had since 2008.
Right.
But what's happened, you know, the context here of this decision is that there's been a really dramatic change just in the last few weeks that seems to have indicated that this so-called anti-steering policy is not going to survive much longer anyway. So the decision in this case that requires Apple to allow links to alternative payment methods in the apps doesn't have the impact that it would have had a year ago or over a year ago now when that case was filed. So Epic here may not be getting the credit it deserves for taking on this issue last August.
Okay. And David, can you confirm whether the initial action for which Fortnite was taken off the store is now permissible on iOS or not? And by that, I mean, like, they originally had an alternative payment at a discount, and then the purchase was done actually in-app.
Well, this is a really interesting question, and you know, you would think with an opinion that's 180 pages long, we would know for sure if
right.
What Epic did, you know, was okay, but we actually really don't. So what the court said is that developers must be able to include in their apps, quote, buttons, external links, or other calls to action that direct customers to alternative purchasing mechanisms. So they took this language right from Apple's developer agreement, which of course says that you can't include buttons, links, or calls to action. So the question is, I think we all know what links are and what calls to action are. What is meant by buttons? You know, it could mean just links, but that probably, you know, seems to not have made much sense in a very carefully worded legal opinion. So you could say, well, buttons suggest a sort of in-app functionality where users can easily enter payment information rather than being taken out of the app onto an external web page and then potentially having to try to figure out how to get back in the game. It certainly would have been helpful if the court had clarified this. You know, does the decision mean only that apps can direct users to outside payment alternatives, or does it mean that apps can include alternative payment mechanisms?
Right.
So, sorry, just a little bit more on the legal side. So the Apple developer agreement, it says that developers must use in-app purchase. And by that, of course, they mean their App Store. But the court didn't address that directly. The court just said, you can't stop apps from including these buttons, links, or calls to action. So we're just not really clear if the court's decision means that this basic rule that you must use the Apple App Store still applies, and whether that alternative functionality can be right in the apps.
Great. And Chris, from your perspective at Xsolla, what do you guys think with respect, like how are you interpreting the court ruling, and what products are you kind of getting ready for folks who want to do external payments?
Yeah, I think we have kind of a conservative view on the ruling at the moment. Really, it breaks down into two parts. There's what's happening now and what do we think is really defensible and allowable, and what are we getting feedback from some of our partners on who have done their own legal reviews. And then there's sort of the future, which is the holy grail of, as David had been talking about, the side-by-side in-app purchases. So for now, we view it as the first part of a wall coming down, and the ability to really make a connection between the app and commerce outside of the app, whether it's through top-up pages, mobile web shops, things like that. And that's something that we're really leaning into and preparing, and can go into that a little bit more later. But this whole idea of a mobile web shop and doing commerce on the web, and it's linked to your app, and keeping players in-app while you're doing it is sort of where we're looking at the moment.
Got it. And then in terms of like your interpretation of who won this court case, maybe we could go around and kind of get your interpretations of who do you guys think won, and maybe David, since you're the lawyer, we can start with you.
Sure. So I think, as Chris just said, this is the first step, let's say, but it comes in the context of a number of other events that have occurred just in the last few weeks. In Korea, in Japan, settlement of the Malcolm class action lawsuit, which is being held in the same court as the Epic Apple lawsuit. So, it seems to be, as well as some concessions by Apple, reader apps can now include links to outside payment links for renewals. So, we've seen the tide change here really just very recently. Probably, as the clerks in the judge's court here were just finalizing this opinion, which I think a year ago would have been fairly significant. Now we've had this change in coming from various angles.
Right. And Chris, what about you?
Yeah, I mean, I think. Sorry, Joseph. So how are we looking at it? Right.
Yeah. Who do you consider this a win for? Is it an Epic win? Is it an Apple win? Do you think it's more of a split sort of situation? What do you think?
Yeah, I think this is kind of a split. I think overall it's a win for developers. It is just further confidence for developers that they can start to monetize their users beyond just the in-app purchase system. And I know that's something that we've had some companies already doing that, right? With top-up pages or running sort of cross-play games on the web to mobile that they're directing players to. But you had a lot of companies that were kind of sitting on the sidelines waiting to see because they didn't want to get in violation of any of Apple's guidelines. So what we're hearing is that this is giving those companies that were on the sidelines the confidence to sort of dip their toes into this new way to monetize users. I think it's kind of also a win for Apple because they were not deemed to be a monopoly. And I'm not a lawyer. David can absolutely correct me and guide on all of this. But from my understanding, this still leaves Apple the power to tax their ecosystem. So even if they're going to lose revenue through in-app purchases and that 30% fee, they're still going to be able to find other ways to apply a tax, right, for being in their ecosystem. And then at the end of the day, Epic, Tim Sweeney obviously is not super happy with the outcome. It doesn't get them everything opened up the way they wanted in that monopoly designation. So I think Epic kind of comes in third place on that list.
Got it. Okay, and I think from my perspective, and this may differ from a lot of the game industries, I actually think, and to your points, Tim Sweeney has been upset in his tweets and things like that. But my personal view is that this was, in my opinion, a huge win for Epic with a huge caveat. And the way that I view this is that if we're focused on outcomes, I think Epic is getting or will eventually get everything that they're seeking. And these outcomes, in my opinion, are the direct results stemming from this case. So even if we get, so let's consider like 3 levels of externalization. The first is external payments off app, such as in a web browser. The second would be a seamless in-app alternative payments experience. So, and then the third would be alternative app stores without kind of like the Google, like, 100 warning pop-ups and things like that in order for you to be able to install that alternative app store. And at the very least, from the current court ruling, it seems like we got number 1. It's questionable, to David's point, about whether number 2 might still be allowable or not. So for me, I feel that this whole case and whether Epic or Apple won kind of hinges around something that hasn't been talked about, which is differentiated pricing, right? So it's not, if you looked at the original payment flow in Fortnite with Epic Direct Payments, it wasn't great. It was not much better than if you did kind of go to an external link, in my opinion. And so I think that in a scenario in which Apple does not allow Epic Direct Payments to give players like a 20% discount as they were doing before, then I would agree that this is not a win. And I know Tim Sweeney is going to continue to rail against Apple until he gets exactly what he wants, which is alternative app stores. But from my perspective, I think if not for this case, we wouldn't have all of the focus and attention on Apple. We wouldn't have things like legislation around Open App Markets Act and things like that. And so for me, I personally view this as a huge one for Epic. So maybe moving on to the next question about, so how does this play out for Apple and what are the likely scenarios and legal or business impacts? And maybe I can also, David, I don't know if you're familiar with the Open App Markets Act, but it might be good to kind of discuss that if you have some, for our audience, if you have some background or context on that.
Sure. So the Open App Markets Act, which was introduced to the U.S. Congress last month in August, has some fairly broad terms with respect to opening up the platforms to alternative, not just alternative payment mechanisms, but in fact alternative app stores themselves. So it's quite somewhat surprising, I would say, that this legislation was introduced to the U.S. Congress with such broad terms. But in fact, Apple, Google, and any other platform with 50 million or more U.S. users, not sure if there is one, would be required to allow, not just to allow alternative app stores, but even to this level of detail, to allow users to set those alternative app stores as their default app stores. It includes a number of other terms as well. For example, they can't, MFN pricing cannot be mandated for developers. The platform operators cannot use information that they collect from users outside of apps to improve their position with respect to their own apps or their own app stores, and a number of other terms. It's certainly a legislation, a bill that has been prepared, in close consultation with with parties that want to see these a major change in how consumers experience mobile apps and how they're purchased.
Got it. And Chris, what do you think?
Yeah, I mean, this is where I'm really interested to see how things play out. I think legislation, not just here in the US, but around the world, right? We're seeing it in Russia, South Korea, Japan, right? There's been movements. I think this is where the real opportunity to get that full win exists and to really break open the app stores in a way that, Epic is trying to do through the courts. So I'm really interested in that. I also was surprised at the breadth of the language. I thought it was had much more power, or could have much more impact than I would have expected out of some legislation.
Right.
So I'll be keeping an eye on that very closely.
Okay. And maybe the next question I can ask you guys is, what do you guys think is the outlook on App Store payments and the store? I mean, do any of you not think that we eventually get to alternative app stores or to getting full support for in-app purchase? Or what do you guys think?
Well, I personally think that we're going to see within, let's say, 2 to 3 years, we're going to see completely open platforms, whether that comes about through court decisions, whether that comes about through legislation, whether that comes about, perhaps as a result of, just an initiative on one or both major platforms to sort of be the leader. I think that's what we're going to see. There certainly is a trend, as Chris has noted, globally, which is picking up inertia now over the last few months towards a deconsolidation of these major players that have aggregated really quite a lot of power, for a variety of reasons. One is that certainly in the United States over the last several years, there's been this feeling that we don't want to legislate internet companies too much. We don't want to we don't want to destroy this nascent new industry and this great new tool, but we're pretty much past that sentiment, I think, at this point, and certainly Europe probably never really had that sort of premise in terms of their regulation of internet-based businesses. So what we're seeing now is a trend towards critically evaluating the market power that these companies hold across various sectors, not just the ones they started in, but they have successfully leveraged across boundaries, and evaluating whether those powers are legitimate, whether they're legal, whether they're good for consumers.
Yeah, totally agree. And it was interesting. I ran a survey, super scientific survey on LinkedIn with this question, right? Do we think the App Store will open up or not? And almost 65% of the respondents felt that within 2 years it would actually open up fully to side-by-side payments, alternative payment methods, and just a small minority thought that it wouldn't, or it would be further off in the future. So, take it for what it's worth, but it's an interesting crowdsourced data point that I think mirrors what we're saying here.
Right. And I actually ran a survey myself in terms of like what would Epic's App Store market share on iOS be if they were able to compete in the market? And it was just like all over the map. It was like almost an even distribution between like less than 10%, 10 to 25%, 25 to 50, 50 to 75. So it seems like nobody really knows if Epic were able to get on, like how much App Store revenue they would, how much market share they would be able to gain. So maybe the one last question I can ask here, and Chris, it's great to have you on as potentially a major player in the space in terms of winners and losers based upon this ruling and things that are playing out. But who do you guys consider to be some of the biggest winners and losers in this? And maybe, I'll go ahead and start, but I actually think that the other angle that I don't think people consider is Apple itself, right? Like people are thinking that Apple is a loser in all this, but I actually think that Apple could be a winner if this opens them up to be able to compete more at the apps level. I kind of felt like Apple may have been picking spots, or at least that's my speculation. So if they were able to go full on assault, and this would assume that they have the resources and people to do it, they'd be able to compete across the board. And, if they were to start like an M&A apps team and just basically pick off number 2 in every category and make them number 1 like that. So it's not, I guess Apple doesn't necessarily need to be a full loser in all this. But what do you guys think in terms of winners and losers?
Yeah. I think Apple is, they've won in the sense that they've gotten time. I think this ruling gives them time to really focus on what their life is like after the App Store is opened up, so they can continue to do business as usual, take the next year or two to really figure out a new business model that can meet or exceed the revenue that they're going to lose, right, off of the App Stores, and potentially come up with a model to tax everybody within their ecosystem that is a lot more sort of friendly to the public and isn't going to draw the ire of whether it's consumers or governments or whatever it might be. So I think in that sense, this is a win for them. It gives them time, they can play it out. And then, like I said, I think it is also a win for developers. It's a big win. As David mentioned, a year ago, it probably would have been bigger news. And I think we're all starting to open up to the possibilities. But this really is a chance for developers to earn significantly more revenue, whether it's through higher margins, being able to convert non-spenders to spenders because you have much more data that you can get on them now if you implement different types of payment methods. So I think it's a real win for developers. And then also just the chance for developers to get a closer relationship to their players. If they can start to put in buttons or links to not just commerce things and payment options, but stuff that is based on the data they've gathered about that player, they can start to build that closer relationship. So I think it's a big win for developers, especially in light of IDFA taking away some of the advertising opportunities to target certain players. If you can start to connect that link between the web and the app deeper, you can start to benefit from a lot of the data you would get on the web about who your best players might be. So in that sense, there's a whole realm there. Marketing, influencers, all of that starts to open up a little bit more as well. And then, Epic, obviously they don't have what they have aspired to, but I think it's potentially a win on the individual game level. But to get a store in there is right. That's what they're looking for. So,
Any thoughts, David?
Well, I would say, one thing interesting that you saw at the time that this dispute broke out now last year was lots of people saying, don't ruin the Apple ecosystem. Personally as a consumer, I certainly can understand that sentiment. From a legal perspective, it does seem to me to be very questionable that a company that I bought a piece of hardware from, is always in the background deciding what I can and can't put on that device that I purchased. But certainly, you can appreciate why a lot of people are concerned about what it might mean to have all these different app stores. Is it security? Is it user experience? What about these concerns? So, I've no doubt that that whatever approach Apple decides to take, that it's going to be, very well thought out, and we're not going to see the user experience compromised too much. But I think, regardless of what the courts say and what the regulators say in various jurisdictions, at the end of the day, people like the convenience that they have now. They like the fact they don't have to worry about viruses. They like the way the user experience works and the way it looks. So
Right.
we'll have to see how it plays out.
Right. Okay, and maybe just to wrap, Chris, what are you guys at Xsolla doing? Are there any specific new initiatives or new things that you are doing, given the recent court ruling?
absolutely. So we have sort of redirected a lot of our resources to this. We had already been working for the past year on a number of different solutions that would work with mobile developers, and we've taken that and sort of really packaged it all up into this sort of web shop for mobile that we're calling it, and it brings together all these methods that allow you to monetize off of the App Store on a web page, but connected directly to your app. And whether this is microtransactions, subscriptions, whatever it may be, probably most importantly is opening up to developers over 700 different payment methods worldwide. And that's something that Apple, with their App Store have been you miss out on, right? You don't actually you only cover maybe 70% of the players out there and their ability to spend. So, we're bringing in the ability to cover the entire world. So that obviously right away converts a lot of non-spenders to spenders. And a number of other things that go into this. I won't bore you with all the salesmanship of it, except for one thing. What we are seeing with partners that we're working with is significant revenue increases in the 30 to 40% range by doing what Apple or the court is now saying you're allowed to do with Apple. So I think, there's a lot of opportunity and would love to talk with people about it.
All right, awesome. Okay, guys, thanks so much for your thoughts and opinions, and for the audience, until next time, catch y'all later. Thanks. Bye.